everyone. Right now we're going to go over the poem that you were asked to read for the Week 5 discussion. It is Sonnet 18, or Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day by William Shakespeare. This is a poem that you may have actually heard before, or at least parts of it. It's not the easiest poem to really figure out what's happening. A lot of times we think we know, but again, we've learned that going line by line can help us figure out exactly what's happening in the poem. So that's what we're going to do. So the poem starts with a question, and I guess we could assume that the rest of the poem then answers that question. So we're going to see if that's the case. One thing you need to know, actually a couple things. First, it is William Shakespeare, so this poem was written late 1500s, early 1600s. It's really old. He's using, a lot of people think that this is Old English, but it's actually modern English. Old English, you wouldn't even be able to recognize the words. Middle English, you might be able to recognize some, but still pretty much like a foreign language. This form of English is modern English. Some words are not used the same way today as they were back then, and the way the words are arranged might not be very familiar to us either, but we can literally look at each word and pretty much recognize it and know what it means. It is modern English. But it is an older version of modern English, so it is still sometimes difficult to comprehend. Another thing you want to think about with this poem is that it is what we call a sonnet. And a sonnet is a poem that is 14 lines long. And that's pretty much the basic definition of a sonnet. However, there are different types of sonnets out there. One of the very famous types of sonnets is called a Petrarchan sonnet. And in that sonnet, the ideas are arranged in a very specific way. You have an idea that is mentioned and developed in the first 8 lines of the sonnet, and then the last 6 lines of the sonnet offer some sort of resolution or solution to what was presented in the first 8. We also have a Shakespearean sonnet. He did not invent it, he simply made it famous. So, we call it a Shakespearean sonnet. He's one of the most prolific authors of all time. And he used this form so regularly, and he was so famous, that it is now referred to as a Shakespearean sonnet. So with a Shakespearean sonnet, the ideas are arranged in a little different format. He uses what we call 3 quatrains, and then a rhyming couplet. And if you think quatrain, Q-U-A-T, like quarter, 4. So a quatrain is a group of 4 lines. So the first 4 lines kind of go together. The next 4 lines kind of go together. The next 4 lines kind of go together. And then we have a rhyming couplet. Couplet, couple, 2. So the last 2 lines go together. And in a Shakespearean sonnet, the last 2 lines are kind of like a nice little bow that just kind of wraps everything up. And it makes a point about those 12 lines that came first. So that can kind of give you an idea of how to logically think about the ideas and how they're presented, the order that they're presented in. That's all we really need to know. We don't need to get into any more specifics. So we're going to go through this sonnet, quatrain by quatrain, and then take a look at the rhyming couplet. So, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? And he's saying, can I do that? Or Is it okay if I do that? I'm going to compare you, the subject of this poem, whoever that is, I'm going to compare you to a summer's day. It sounds very lovely, right? Okay. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. So he almost answers himself immediately. Can I compare you to a summer's day? Well, actually, no, because you are even more lovely and more temperate, meaning mild, because summer can be really hot, right? You're actually more lovely and more temperate. And now I'm going to explain why. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May. So one thing that's actually not so great about the beginning of summer, late spring, early summer, is that all those flower buds that had just come out, maybe they had bloomed, then we get all these storms in late spring, early summer, and the winds just shake the buds right off. They're gone. And it's true. And summer's lease hath all too short a date. So if you think about a lease is a specific amount of time that you are supposed to stay in a place, right? If you sign a lease to an apartment, it could be like a 6-month lease or a 12-month lease. Summer's lease, the amount of time that summer is supposed to be here, has all too short a date. So her lease, summer's lease, doesn't last long enough. It's too short. That's another thing that's not so great about summer. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines. Sometimes it's just too darn hot in summer. That's another thing that's not so great about it. And often is his gold complexion dimmed. So we're still talking about the eye of heaven, the sun. Often is his gold complexion dimmed. Summer thunderstorms coming through. It's cloudy, rainy. We don't even get the sun. And every fair from fair sometime declines. Every fair. Think of the word fair as beauty. You know, she's a very fair young lady. Beautiful. So think of it as beauty. And every beauty from beauty sometime declines. So oftentimes things that are beautiful now don't remain beautiful. They decline from that beauty, including all the things of summer, right? Late spring, early summer. They don't stay beautiful. So that's another thing not so great about summer. And that happens by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. So sometimes things lose their beauty by chance. Sometimes things lose their beauty because it's simply a natural part of life. It's just nature's course, right? So all of those things, starting from the rough winds down to, losing their beauty by chance or just because it's nature, all of those things are things about summer that in the speaker's mind really aren't so great. Everybody thinks summer is fabulous. And it can be, but there's also these elements that the speaker just mentioned that make summer not so great. But thy eternal summer shall not fade. Thy, speaking to the person, the subject of the poem again. But thy eternal summer shall not fade. You will always be beautiful. Your summer will never fade. You will always be in your prime. Nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. Owest is a shortened version of own. Nor will you lose possession of the beauty you own. So not only will you always stay in your prime, but you'll always stay beautiful. Nor shall death brag thou wonderest in his shade. So if death can brag that he has you in his shade, it means you died. He has taken you. subject of this poem, Death will not be able to brag that he has this person, meaning this person will never die. When in eternal lines to time thou growest. It's almost like a flower in the summer. She'll always be in summer. She'll always be in her prime. She'll always be beautiful. She'll never die because she is growing in eternal lines to time. What are these eternal lines? We're reading them right now. The lines of the poem. Oh, okay. So, we can't compare her to a summer's day because there's actually all these things about summer that aren't so great. And she doesn't have to worry about any of those things happening to her. She'll always be in her prime. She'll always be beautiful. She'll never die because she is growing and living in these lines of poetry. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so as long as there are men on earth breathing and seeing, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Well, what is this? So long lives this, the poem, and this gives life to thee. So he's basically saying, I could try to compare you to a summer's day, but I really can't because you're so much better than a summer's day, because all these bad things happen in summer. You know, the beautiful things get blown away. It's always too hot. It doesn't last long enough. The beauty fades, blah, blah, blah. But you will always be in your prime. You will always be beautiful, and you will never die. Why? Because I, the poet, the speaker of this poem, I have captured you in the lines of this poem. And as long as there are men around to read, they're going to be reading my poetry because it's so good that I have given you everlasting life. That is what the poem says. If you go line by line. It's a very interesting poem because we often read it and think that it is this beautifully romantic piece where he extols the virtues and everything that make his beloved so wonderful. But it's really about how wonderful he is, that he can capture her in the lines of the poetry and keep her young and beautiful forever. Interesting. I don't know if any of you got that out of the discussion. But think about all of the imagery that's used in here too. It's interesting to think about, what it means going line by line. And it might make you think that he's very arrogant, but at the same time, arrogance that is placed appropriately isn't so bad. Meaning, if he really is that good, then the arrogance is understandable. And looking at looking at the poem again, then you can ask yourself, okay, he is claiming that he's so good that as long as there are men on earth, they will be reading his stuff, reading his poetry, and therefore she will live forever in the poetry. He's making that claim, a big claim, about himself and his own skills. Let's go back through the poem and see if his skills really match up. And if you think about, what poetry includes, the imagery, especially the imagery, the rhyme, the rhythm, all of that good stuff. Is it here? No. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May. That's a nice image. Summer's lease hath all too short a date. like Summer actually can rent something, can sign a lease. So that's what we call personification, giving it human characteristics. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines. Well, that's a metaphor, right? The eye of heaven, the sun. And often is his gold complexion dimmed. Well, that's an interesting way of saying cloudy. You know, this figurative language is all throughout. And again, personification, giving human characteristics to the sun. I think that perhaps the skill is there. And in reality, here we are, 2020, and we are still reading his stuff. So, perhaps the arrogance was not misplaced, and he did give her everlasting life. If it was a woman, which there's a lot of conjecture and actually a lot of research to say that a lot of Shakespeare's sonnets were actually written about a young man. And then there's also a dark lady who's in the sonnets. It's very interesting. But either way, this is a good example of a poem that is assumed to be about the subject of the poem, the beloved, the person it's about. When in reality, it's more about the poet himself and the speaker, how they work together to create this poem that is very skillful and able to capture her beauty and her prime forever. All right. So, if you have any questions,